Christmas in terms of dollars spent.
It's up there. It's up there.
You can drive around and you will see Halloween stores that are open year-round.
Yep.
You won't find Easter stores open year-round. You won't find Thanksgiving stores.
I've actually never seen a Halloween store that's open year-round. I got to take Mr. Swanson's word for that one. We have a couple of spirit places that tend to be in the same place every year. I've never seen one open year-round. I just haven't. Maybe somewhere there are. You won't. I'm certain you won't find a Thanksgiving store or an Easter store open year-round. The reason why is it is not as interesting. It is not as fun as Halloween. Again, I didn't make that the case. I'm not even saying that I care if that's the case. I don't. I obviously don't celebrate Easter because, well, but I do make a big deal out of Halloween, but that's me. I'm not a Christian, and I don't think he's talking about me.
Or Mother's Day stores that are open year-round, but you will find Halloween stores.
The data is right here in front of me, Dave. 2005, $3.29 billion. This year, $7 billion. That would be an increase of 300%.
This point's been made.
And, oh, by the way, did I mention the median income of Americans has topped in 2005? So, friends, Americans are committed to the Day of the Dead. I mean,
no, Americans are not committed to the Day of the Dead any more than they're committed to anything else. They happen to have a better time on the Day of the Dead than they do most other holidays, except perhaps Christmas. By the way, Christmas, that's commitment. If you're not a Christian and you tried, or even if just a Christian that for other reason doesn't want to celebrate Christmas, as some don't, just try getting out of Christmas. Just try. I don't know anyone that's committed to the Day of the Dead, beyond the fact that they celebrate. If celebrating it makes them committed, sure.
This is it. This is it. This is what they believe in. This is what they want.
Celebrating Halloween has nothing to do with what you believe in. It is an opportunity to party. That's it. I don't know many people in my life, apart from dedicated pagans, which are not a majority of the population, that celebrate Halloween on account of anything they believe in. It's an opportunity to party in a certain way that deals with, sometimes doesn't even deal with death. You'll go to I've seen people dressed as fembots from Austin Powers or fairies or that sort of thing. It's not necessarily having to do with death.
Want to do. Now, it's, again, not to say that every single American understands the Day of the Dead and all of the religious philosophy that underlies the celebration of the Day of the Dead. Please understand that things changed in the Western world as Christian society and Christian culture got the upper hand over a period of time. There was a move towards Christianity. That's why.
We can talk all day about how Christianity got the upper hand because it wasn't all evangelism. Christianity got the upper hand just as much from missionaries with Bibles as crusaders and soldiers over the centuries with swords and arrows. That's another topic, but Christianity did get the upper hand. We've been living in it for about 1,300 years now. Anyway, I'm not going to comment further on that because that's another matter.
There are so many people of European descent that still believe in Jesus Christ, whether they be Reformed, Presbyterian, Lutheran, or evangelical, whatever they are, they have a heritage. And
the vast majority of people in Europe and America are still Christian. The vast majority. In America, it's well over the 90% mark. I don't know about Europe.
Friends, it is true that the pagan holiday of the Day of the Dead was very, very popular for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. And then it was St. Hallows Eve, or All Hallows Eve, that took the place of the Day of the Dead for a period of probably about 1,000 years, from about the 7th or 8th century on to the 1900s. For about 1,000 years, maybe 1,300 years, the influence of Christianity and the celebration of those great men and women of Christian faith that went before us was an important part of the celebration for a long, long time. In other words, Dave, the old Day of the Dead, with its meaning and name, was shifted to a new meaning and a new name, that is All Hallows Eve. And the meaning was to celebrate those who had gone before us in the Christian faith, sort of the Hebrews 11 faith celebration of those who have lived the life of faith over thousands and thousands of years.
It was also because it was always the policy of the Roman Catholic Church, who did invent that, to copy pagan celebrations and pagan customs and adopt them as Christianity, and eventually, over time, convince the populace that it was their idea all along. Christmas is a good example of this. Anyway,
so it was a celebration of life, of resurrection life, of saints who had gone before us and are indeed expected to be resurrected and be with Christ forever. That kind of thing was celebrated for about 1,000 years until the 1900s, where what is interesting here, David, interesting irony, they retained the name Halloween. So they retained the name and jetted the meaning. So what's interesting in the case of Halloween is the pagan festival was displaced by a Christian concept in name and intent, and then the intent was shifted in the early part of the 20th century away from any remembrance of any Christian, any faith that has ever existed in the history of mankind, to a celebration of the Day of the Dead. And yet they retain the name. I just think it's interesting. They haven't returned to the Day of the Dead. They don't call it the Day of the Dead. They still call it Halloween,
Right.
which is a derivation from All Hallows Eve.
old
Right,
habits die
right.
hard.
So what we had was basically a Druid festival that
Yeah.
thought on this day you were very close to death, and they had their rites and their ceremonies where they did stuff, fellowship with the dead, as it were. And then Pope Boniface IV comes along and says, no, what we're going to do is we're going to take over that holiday. We're going to make it a martyr's day. And then sometime later, Pope Gregory III makes it the day for all saints who've passed into glory. And then we were to celebrate all the saints, remember the saints who lived before us and went to glory. And they changed the name then from All Saints Day, and then that's All Hallows, or all things that are holy, to the Holy Ones Days, to Halloween. And that was how we got Halloween in its old iteration, and then it became back to its pagan's roots. Now, we see this with the other holidays as well. We see that Christmas, which started out as a celebration of the shortest day of the year. They had the calendar a little bit wrong, but it was basically the passing from the short days to the beginning of the long days. So it was the festival, the end of the darkness is starting to be vanquished, and it was a pagan day. And we said, no, we're going to celebrate the birth of Christ, the incarnation on that day. We changed the name. It's called Christmas, and then we gutted it of its meaning and made it commercial.
Yeah.
Easter
But retain the name.
but retain the meaning.
Same things happen in Halloween. It's just interesting in a post-Christian era. The point we're making is, friends, we've
Not
moved
post-Christian
out
yet.
of the Christian era to a post-Christian era. They are gutting the meaning of the days and bringing back the pagan concepts of the days, and yet for some strange reason, at least for the time being, maybe for the next 10 years or 15 years, retaining the old Christian name for the holiday. But that may be gone soon as well. Dave, I think we want to touch just a moment on the pagan meaning of the day, because so many people, 67% of Americans, are celebrating Halloween, and it has nothing to do with remembering those who went before us, whether it be the Reformed folks who celebrate a Reformation Day and remember Martin Luther and John Calvin and John Knox and some of the great Reformation saints, or whether it be those that remember the martyrs, Polycarp and others that were martyred for the faith over a period of the last 1,500 years. So you have those Christians who used to celebrate the day by remembering those courageous men and women of faith that gave their lives for Jesus Christ as martyrs. You have that, but that's not the 67% of Americans that are celebrating the day. Everybody needs to understand that, okay? The 67% of Americans, or I guess it's now 72%, my mistake, 72% of Americans that are celebrating Halloween and dressing up like demons and witches and pirates are not celebrating Halloween.
I don't think anyone has the stats as to what people are dressing up as. Yes, there are people dressing up as demons and pirates and bears, oh my.
As it's been celebrated for 1,600 years under Christian influence, they are celebrating the Day of the Dead. So you need to understand, if you're celebrating the Day of the Dead, you need to understand why you're celebrating it. And it's a pagan holiday. It goes way back, and it's got lots and lots of parallel routes that it took in various parts of the world. And I believe all of them will trace back to the worldwide flood. I believe all of them trace back to a period of time when God destroyed the whole world and saved 8 people, and yet those 8 people are not being celebrated by the posterity of the people of Japheth and Ham who left and
Why would they? Why would you celebrate anything having to do with Japheth and Ham and Canaan and Shem? Why on that day? What correlation could you make using the Bible or anything else? Would you connect this to the Great Flood? I'm not even going to get into whether or not I think the Great Flood is a ridiculous story, particularly with the Ark. I'm not a Christian, so by itself, that should tell you that I think it is. But that said,
wandered away and forgot all about the God who brought judgment upon the earth. And so,
where does it say in the Bible that anybody wandered away after the flood incident and forgot about him? Because I've read it many times. It's not in there.
they didn't want to talk about the God who brought judgment upon the earth. All they were interested in was celebrating the departed souls and spirits of those who had vanquished in the flood.
No. Where? Is that in the Bible anywhere where anyone even made mention of the people who were vanquished in the flood? It's not. This guy is doing what religious people have been doing for centuries, that Christians have been accusing people of other religions of doing for centuries. And that's the blank spots in the Bible that don't fit with their worldview, making up other stuff that don't appear in the Bible. I've heard Christians scorn the Mormons for doing this. I've heard Christians scorn the Jews for doing this with the Talmud. I've heard the Catholics I've heard picked on for this. Fundamentalists do it too. You just heard it.
And so, friends, it's a celebration of the dead. It's not a remembrance of the saints. It's not a remembrance of Noah. It's not a remembrance of...
Nobody said ever at any time in history that it's a remembrance of Noah. It never was intended to be. Not under any form or guise that All Hallows Eve or any of the other late end of October, beginning of early fall celebrations had. Not one.
The God of judgment. It's certainly not the fear of the God of judgment. It is rather a fear of the departed souls of those who died in the flood or those who died after the flood. And it's the same thing was celebrated by the Aztec.
You know, Mother's Day has nothing, they don't celebrate Mother's Day because of the remembrance of Noah's wife. How have we regressed to this, that we're not acknowledging Noah's wife, who would be the mother of us all? When did we regress so that we're not celebrating that in Mother's Day? Obviously, we never did. Same is true with Halloween. There's nothing having to do with Noah and Halloween because there never was to start with, not even under the Christian celebration that was invented under Pope Boniface.
It's celebrated by the Mexicans in Dia de Muertos today. It's also celebrated in Japan in the Bon Festival, and in Korea in a little festival called the Kuseok, and Qingming out in China. So around the world you have many celebrations of this. The Celts, as Dave mentioned, celebrate it as Samhain, or a celebration of a day in which the dead and the living come somewhat in contact with each other for a single day, and that's also what the Japanese recognize as the celebration of bone. The Romans also had a Parentalia, a similar celebration. Friends, all of these are derivative. I believe they all come from the single root of the worldwide flood and those that came out of the world.
And he bases that on absolutely nothing.
Flood and refused to remember why that flood came upon the earth and who brought that flood upon the earth and the meaning of the rainbow and the meaning of the salvation of Noah and his family. They forgot all about that, all about the God who saved Noah.
Not a word about that in the Bible, about how they forgot all about that.
And his family. They forgot all about salvation and redemption and the resurrection to newness of life. They forgot all about the good side.
How would they forget about the resurrection? You're referring to Jesus. This man, Kevin Swanson's referring to Jesus. How is he forgetting about a resurrection that has not yet occurred? He is still talking about the descendants, about Noah's children and his descendants.
Rather, they went in focused in a bitter sense upon those who passed away and would not live to an everlasting life, would not be resurrected to eternal life. So you see...
There was no mention of eternal life in the Old Testament, particularly with the Torah. Again, it sounds... unless I'm missing something here, he's talking about Noah and his descendants, particularly his recent descendants after Ham, Shem, and Japheth, the people who remembered the people who died in a flood. Nothing. You can't even take apocryphal writings and use this. This is coming straight from his proverbial ass.
Two different religions forming in the celebration of holidays here. Dave, I think this is the most interesting thing. You'd see those who want to celebrate the memory of saints who would be resurrected, and those who want to celebrate those who will not be resurrected but will live in everlasting death forever and ever. And Dave, that's pretty depressing. By the time you come to the point where you want to celebrate the Day of the Dead, as the Japanese do, as the Koreans do, the Chinese do, as the old Romans did, as the Mexicans do, as 67% or 72% of Americans want to do today, as they celebrate the Day of the Dead, they more and more reject the celebration of the resurrection from the dead, and that is really characterized.
One thing has nothing to do with the other. Just because you're celebrating and remembering the dead does not mean that you're rejecting any of the Christianity's tenets, even however silly I might think it is, the resurrection. One thing has nothing to do with the other. You can say that it is a pagan holiday, and you would be right. You can say that you're not supposed to be acknowledging pagan holidays and then quote Old Testament scriptures. That's up to you. I'm not a Christian, so that is for the Christians to discuss among themselves. But I'm sorry, you're way off base.
More and more of the apostate West.
Kevin, I think somewhere deep in the psychology of man,
The West is not, from a Christian standpoint, apostate, unless you consider most of the Christians who profess to be Christians not to be Christians. The majority of the West is Christian.
suppressing of truth and unrighteousness. And this manifests itself during this time. Now, the Bible says, all who hate me love death. I think there's some mockery and scorn and ridicule of this idea that we shall surely die. That is why some of the most popular characters and costumes are those of the undead, those who have died but not died. The Dracula, he is called an undead, the vampire. The zombies, those are the non-living, but not quite dead. Those who have suffered a dead, but not a resurrection.
These are outrageously popular, Dave, in the movies. And remember the Mormon who wrote the books on the vampire series. Very, very, very popular. The idea of the undead and the vampires, very, very popular because people are resisting all notions of the true resurrection of Jesus Christ. I mean, these
are basically saying, I don't need the resurrection.
Absolutely, absolutely, right.
Okay. Being interested in vampire novels, which I'm not, but if I were, I know the concept of a vampire. I've watched a few vampire movies in my life. Being interested in vampires is not tantamount to saying I don't need the resurrection of Jesus. I'm not interested in vampirism. I'm not interested in vampire novels, and I've done that all by myself without them. However, no, you're putting words in people's mouths, and that's not nice. There are plenty of Christians that are fans of the Twilight series. I'm not. That won't surprise you. I'm a guy. But to say that because you enjoy a form of fiction, that means you're saying you don't need the resurrection of Christ is asinine. And, of course, I wish he would elaborate on how he justifies this, but he doesn't. He just says it, drops the ball, and move on to something else in a minute.
Right, and that their desire, of course, is to become the vampire, as Bella does in the stories. And, ladies and gentlemen, the fascination with the undead, fascination with witches and vampires is an apostasy. It's ultimately a heresy that takes a sharp left turn away from what the Word of God tells us concerning.
This is how the silly doctrines in the Catholic Church got invented, where a pope, I mean, fortunately, this guy doesn't have the kind of authority that, popes have had in the past, but you basically have teachers and, I should say clergy in the Catholic Church saying, I don't like this. I'm going to connect A to Y to Q to Z to say that to do this is to do something else. In this case, to enjoy a form of fiction is to reject Jesus, or even to wish to be a vampire yourself. Here's a man speaking for other people. Here's a man who feels the right to speak for other people. This has been a common thread for the last 2,000 years, by the way. Well, really longer. I don't want to just say that Christians have done this, but let's look at the history, right? No, he's dead wrong. Sorry, but you're dead wrong.
Our our problem with death, our problem with sin, our problem with judgment, our problem with Almighty God, and our absolute necessity to get things right with God and to reconcile with Him that we might be resurrected.
See, if you're talking to a Christian, some of your points here might be relevant. I'm assuming at this point that Kevin Swanson's talking to an entirely Christian audience. In fact, in all the videos I listen to, he doesn't seem to be evangelical in the sense where he wishes to convert non-Christians. His converted audience is people who are already Christians that might not be Christian enough for him. Whether it's because they're okay with gays, whether it's because they don't hold to right-wing politics, whatever the case may be. So I want to some extent recognize that before I go on here.
That we might deal with the problem of death forever. And of course, we find that through our Lord Jesus Christ.
Kevin, you shouldn't allow your children or yourself to dress up this way, because this is having fellowship with the unfruitful works of darkness. I don't think it could be more clear. You're communing, you're pretending to be, you're being part of this darkness of death and murder and blood-sucking and brain-eating and whatever other abomination that man can come up with. Don't have fellowship with the unfruitful works of darkness. If you got to dress up as Martin Luther, dress up as a George Washington, dress up as a saint, dress up as...
By the way, I grew up in the church. Spent a lot of time in Baptist churches as a kid when I was in Texas. They tried this stuff too. When you copy a carnal festival, whether it's Halloween or anything that's done that's jovial, that the rest of the world does. Christian metal is a good example of this. It always falls flat. Go copy and put a Christian spin on it all you want. It doesn't work anymore. It might have worked 1700 years ago, but it doesn't now. That's my take on it. The kids are going to know that you're copying something that's actually a lot more fun when you just do the real deal.
A martyr, dress up as somebody of virtue.
Well, here's the Wall Street Journal, came out this morning, and at the very top of it, two very cute kids dressed up as a witch and a pirate. Okay, now, Dave...
Both capital offenses, I think.
Both of them. Well, the pirate is an evil man. The witch is an evil person, as defined by biblical ethics.
Yeah, see, that's not my problem. I don't care about biblical ethics, but let's just take it from a Christian perspective. Pirates were the result of an oppressive system of government that basically, I don't know, maybe you're all for feudalism. Not saying that to be against pirates means you are, but pirates were the result of the oppressive nature of feudalism. And when that era ended, for the most part, pirates went away. Witches, capital offenses in the Bible. Please, thank you for pointing that out. It's one of the many reasons I reject it, because practicing certain religious ceremonies in the Bible is considered a just reason to put someone to death. I happen not... Well, obviously, I'm not going to believe that, because by biblical definition, I'm a witch.
Right. Of course, this is what nobody wants to do these days. But my understanding is people still see piracy to be a problem, at least if you watch Captain Phillips, a new movie that came out on the Somalian pirates and what they did to this poor American captain of a ship. I think piracy is universally considered an evil thing, and yet glorified more and more glorified by our culture today, whether it be movies or what have you. Evidently, Captain Phillips still does not glorify pirates very much. And the pirate that was responsible, several of the pirates were killed, and everybody rah-rahed to the pirates being killed. And then the one guy was arrested at the end and taken into captivity.
So much for turning the
I think he was sentenced to 30 years in prison or something. So again, pirates and witches, not good people, not good people. Historically, the reason why people dressed...
I've known many people who identify as witches. By and large, they were all good people. By that meaning, you could hand them your wallet to have them hold you for it and not have to worry about anything being missing from it when you get back. You could leave your children with them and not expect anything, any wrong to go their way. You can trust them with your belongings. They, they will not lie to you unless you ask them something that might be none of your business, which is true for everybody. They're just as moral as the next person. These are the witches I've known.
Up as these characters was to
They worship a different god. If that compromises someone's morality to you, then sure.
appease the spirits of evil intent. That was the way the pagans handled it, but don't tell me that's why kids are dressing up as vampires, witches, pirates, and axe murderers today. I don't understand, Dave, exactly why people want to dress up their kids as witches and vampires and child molesters and axe murderers. I mean, why would you?
I don't know anybody who has ever dressed their child up like a child molester. I don't know anybody. This is a straw man if I've ever heard one. I don't know anyone who has ever taken a child. No, not one. I've never heard of somebody second or third hand that has done it.
Want to dress your kid up as an evil person, like a child molester? Why would you want to?
Yeah. There's all these people dressing up their kids as child molesters. It's a plague of. Is nobody? Is none of his own audience calling him out on this?
Dress up a child as Jerry Sandusky, for example, unless you're.
Has anyone done that?
Unless you're trying.
If one person in the entire country did that, I'm going to grant that might have happened. That tells me nothing about that's a fluke. Most sensible people would never dress their child up like a child molester.
Unless you have some kind of fascination with evil, unless you have some kind of fascination with piracy or some kind of.
Everyone has a fascination with piracy. It was a time that people were out living on the sea. They lived they lived very free. They did whatever they wanted to do, including plunder. It certainly was somebody you would have wanted to avoid if you had lived in that era, especially if you were at sea. And they're fascinating. So.
Fascination with witches.
By the way, I don't know anyone who's fascinated with child molesters. Never met one that admitted to it.
Are they minimizing evil? Are they making light of it? By this means, it seems like the post-Christian apostates of the modern age are not doing the Day of the Dead. They're not interacting with horror and evil.
They're not.
As the pagans did. I think this is different. I think we're taking a different turn here.
This is different. I think what's happening in the modern world is that we're shaking our fist at God and saying, I will not submit to your authority. You know?
You can say that of me, because what you consider God, I consider a myth. I don't even know that I'm shaking my fist at something that I don't believe exists. However, I do not believe that a devout Christian that happens to be dressing up like a pirate on Halloween is shaking their fist at God. The very same people that I know to be Christian that will show up dressed like a pirate, if I get belligerent about their religion, and I will on the right time, the right occasion, will defend their religion and even get mad at me just as much as the next person.
What? I like having power that doesn't come from you. I like witchcraft. I like having to be able to manipulate.
People who identify as witches like witchcraft. Not so of everybody else. Dressing like a witch does not tantamount to being one.
Nature without having to obey your law. I like being a pirate because in Pirates of the Caribbean, these were people who violated the laws of the seas and violated the laws of nations.
Violated the laws of nations. Are you saying these were not oppressive laws? This is feudalism we're talking about. This is a time that we were at the cusp of the end of an era where many nations still owned slaves. Serfdom was still a thing. A lord was allowed to simply, by law, take the land of a serf or a commoner simply because he knew somebody. And this wasn't isolated. This happened all the time. So yeah, anyone who violated the laws of the land there, depending on what laws they were violating, I would not criticize, unless murder is one of those things, or rape. They weren't really worried about rape that much back then, though. Not unless you raped an aristocrat.
And and were considered virtuous, at least in the Disney thing, because
Nobody said, even in the Disney movies, which were not even close to historically accurate, and they weren't trying to be, that these people were virtuous.
the nations were bad. This is shaking the fist at authority and being able to get away with it. And I think
Yes. I might say to some latent psychological intent that it might be shaking its fist at authority. And if we were not, had it not been for shaking our fist at authority, America would be a British colony today.
the pagans were flirting with death. I think we see that. We don't have to wait for Halloween for that. We walk around and we see these pagan symbols inked into people's skin everywhere we go.
If they're pagan, wouldn't surprise me. I don't have any tattoos, but the people I know who are pagan will ink pagan symbols into their skin, much the way I know many Christians do the same thing now. I've seen, by the way, I've seen more Bible verses tattooed on people's backs than I've seen pentagrams.
Should you explain to your child that witchcraft is wrong? Should you explain to your child that piracy is evil? Should you
That's for Christians to decide. Obviously, I'm not going to teach that to my son because I don't believe witchcraft is wrong. Some may teach their child that because they don't believe that it's real and they don't want the child to, they might be atheists. I say it depends on how you define witchcraft. There's no simplicity when it comes to this. But let's see what else Mr. Swanson has to say.
explain to your child who wants to dress up as an axe murderer or a child molester that child molestation is an evil thing and that axe murder is an evil thing?
There's that straw man for the third time. I don't know anyone, again, he said it 3 times, I'm saying it 3 times. I don't know of anyone that has ever dressed their child up like a child molester. This is a shameless straw man. This isn't just a misunderstanding about the world around. This is shameless. Nobody does that.
And we ought not to be dallying with it or glorifying the idea by dabbling in the horror of it. Well, friends, we're going to talk about horror in just a moment on the Generations Radio broadcast because I think the real root of this is Americans are fascinated with horror.
Okay. I'm going to run to the loo. I am going to grab myself another cup of coffee, and I'm going to shine me another shoe. I'll be back after these messages, except there's no messages.